Joining me now, CNN political commentator and former senior White House communications aide Jamal Simmons, former New York Lieutenant Governor Betsy McCaughey, and CNN political commentator Errol Lewis. Well, is it case closed? Or should it be?
I don't believe him. Let me say why. He's betting the odds. The fact is, it's highly unlikely that Hunter Biden will be convicted. It's probably going to be a hung jury. Think of it. This is a jury in Wilmington, Delaware. In the last election, 26,000 people in Wilmington voted for Joe Biden. 3,500 voted for Trump. The Bidens are adored in Wilmington, so it's very easy for Biden to say this. I can guarantee you he will not say this about the trial in September on which Hunter is charged with tax evasion.
So you're saying you think that Biden would actually pardon Hunter Biden, despite him saying pretty
Yes, as a father, he would.
No.
But he knows that he's not going to be convicted. He did not say that about the trial in September because there, the stakes are much higher. He's accused of tax evasion, and the money on which he failed to pay taxes came from foreign sources and is linked to influence buying. In other words, to buy the influence of his father. They can actually track the payments to various Biden members, including payments for Joe Biden's mortgage payments.
Just to be clear, there's actually not any evidence linking any of Hunter Biden's wrongdoings to Joe Biden.
You are incorrect. You are incorrect. We have the bank statements. They've been presented in the House of Representatives.
You mean because he paid back a loan to help buy a car from his
No,
from his dad?
because he routinely paid Joe Biden's household bills.
This has been... Look, if Republicans had that evidence that you are suggesting, they would have impeached him by now, and they haven't. Jamal,
I want the audience to know that they do have it.
Well, then they should use it. If they've got it, they should smoke it. Listen.
That's a good one. I like that.
Here's the thing. Is there a world where we imagine that Donald Trump would let a prosecutor who has worked for President Obama come in and investigate one of his children, indict one of his children, let that child go to trial, and then say he would not pardon him? Donald Trump would turn the tables over instead of let any of his kids go through this. Joe Biden has already proven he's willing to stand up for the rule of law in a way that we could all never imagine Donald Trump to do in the same circumstance.
Look, I think the idea of a truce is great. But let's say this, to have a lawfare truce...
What do you mean a truce?
Well, because Dr. Phil was talking about, he used that word before, a truce in the lawfare, in this battle in court between members of the Biden administration and Trump. The fact is, for that to happen, Biden has to call Governor Kathy Hochul and ask her to pardon Trump. Otherwise, it's like asking for a truce now after the 34-count verdict.
I'm going to let Errol in, but I just have to be clear.
It's just like asking Israel to lay down its arms the day after Hamas violated Israel in October.
A truce might be necessary if there were actually any evidence of Biden seeking to influence the prosecution.
Right.
There is no evidence.
Dr. Phil is a charming man. But there is a reason we don't let psychologists practice law. What he describes, this need for a truce, for example, assumes things that just simply don't exist. I mean, it is convenient for Donald Trump to say that my political enemy convinced a grand jury of citizens in Manhattan and a trial jury in Manhattan and an independently elected local prosecutor and an independently elected judge to all conspire against me. And therefore, this is Biden's fault. But that's just not sensible. It's just not true. It's just not the way the system works.
They must have missed the two Trump cases yesterday that were effectively put on hold indefinitely. That happened, too. That is the legal system working in Trump's favor.
Right. But back to this one.
Oh, you don't want to talk about that?
Well, I do want to talk about it for this reason, because every day now the Biden administration is labeling Trump a convicted felon. Very interesting. No, very interesting.
That is a fact.
That the prosecution has requested that the gag order against Trump be maintained through the sentencing, way beyond the debate. This is very interesting. If the gag order's intent were to protect the jury and to protect the integrity of the trial, it would be lifted. But no. They don't want Donald Trump to be able to criticize the government even after the verdict. And that shows that the real purpose of this gag order is to influence the election. Usually when there's a gag order, it applies to both parties, the prosecution and the defense, and the jury is sequestered. This time, the judge didn't sequester the jury and only gagged the defendant. So every night the jury could go home and hear Michael Cohen and others on television
They could also go
accusing
home
Trump
and
of
hear
wrongdoing.
Donald Trump speaking outside of the courthouse, as he did
wasn't-
every day.
He wasn't permitted to
and
say anything about the
Look,
witnesses.
he violated the gag order, what was it, 9 times? So he said it. He said those things
gag
that were
order
actual
was unfair.
violations. So, look, I
Whether
do
it's
want to...
unfair or not, it does seem that when judges put a gag order on a defendant, the defendant has to stand by the judge's order.
This
correct?
was
And
a
I can't
violation.
imagine. Hold on one second, ma'am. I can't imagine that there's a situation where any other young person, maybe, I don't know, the Central Park Five, let's say, I can't imagine where they would be in a courtroom and they would be able to walk out of a courtroom, young men of color, and say, hey, I don't agree with the judge. I think the judge's daughter is somebody who's going against me.
No.
I think they would not be able
They
to
would
impugn
be.
the integrity of a judge and then go back in that courtroom and not be sanctioned or thrown in jail
Untrue.
for what it is they've done.
Untrue. The Supreme Court has ruled again and again that the Sixth Amendment guarantees the defendant, after all, the Bill of Rights
You live in a different world than I do.
The Bill of Rights was written to protect not the government, the reputation of the government, the reputation of a judge. It was written to protect the accused, the defendant, and we're losing sight of that. It doesn't matter whether it's Trump or not. We should always protect the rights of the defendant, the accused, not the government.
That's a very fair point. I want to move on, but I also want to make the point that the judge carved out a pretty narrow gag order that was intended to protect the jury. Now, what he does about the gag order now is still up for adjudication, and so we'll see what he does there. I want to play one more thing from President Biden's interview with ABC. He's talking about this debate that is coming up this month between Trump and Biden and whether or not he's ready for it.
We are 3 weeks from this debate. What do you think you need to accomplish on that debate stage?
Say what I think. Let him say what he thinks. The things he said are off the wall. I want to be a dictator on day one. I want to move in a direction where he talks about, suspending the Constitution. All I have to do is hear what he says, remind people what he says and what I believe and what he believes. He's about him. I'm about the country.
Are you ready for this debate?
Yes.
All right, Errol, do you believe him?
I do believe him. Every State of the Union speech, we see a president who has been described as feeble and unable to put 2 sentences together rise to the occasion. You have to remember, this is somebody who's been at the highest levels of politics for literally a half a century on pure muscle memory. We've watched him again and again in the State of the Union speech, off the cuff, kind of engaging, debating people right there on the floor. So I think he'll be fine. And he just laid out his strategy. It's really no secret. And it's going to be the strategy of the larger campaign, which is to talk about the problems in the country that Dr. Phil says he wants to hear more people about. If Donald Trump can somehow pull himself out of the revenge fantasies and talking about how everything is unfair, the media is unfair and the courts are unfair, and if he can actually talk about some issues, we've got a country that has a housing crisis. This is somebody who allegedly knows something about housing. We'd love to hear him talk about that instead of about his legal problems.
Well, we'll see if Biden can get a word in edgewise, because one of the things Trump does is really try to steamroll over people. He did that actually literally the last time they met on a debate stage. Everyone, thank you very much